Welcome back to the Fantasy Hockey Podcast and the spookiest of Unsustainable Wednesdays. Honestly, this episode, I think, has the hottest takes we've ever delivered on an Unsustainable show. And I don't even say that as like clickbait to get you to watch or listen to the episode. Like, I really do think there's some in here that are going to be very, very contentious on both sides. Like even ones that Brandon and I disagree on, but even more so that I think you all are going to disagree on us with or agree with us on. But either way, I think there's going to be some good discussion, whether it ends up happening on Twitter or Discord or whatever. It's going to be something. So I'm terrified. Yeah. So let's jump into this week's Unsustainably High calls. So just to get right into it, you take us into your first one.
Brian Elliott.
And there you go. Already pissed off an entire fan base.
Yeah. So Brian Elliott basically has had 4 or so good seasons that he's played more than like 40 games in like his entire career. And they were a long time ago. So I get that there's a lot of like fear going on with Hart struggling and now losing starts to Elliott. But I want to reinforce that Elliott he never has been a true starter in his entire career. He's been the best times for him were when he was playing well with Jake Allen and they both were able to complement each other. That was ages ago. So I'm very not concerned with the idea of Elliott taking over the starting crease for any extended period of time. Again, Hart has been struggling, so they're going to give him some time off from the workload, so to speak, but it's still Hart's net, even if it doesn't seem like it is. Don't be dropping Hart. Don't be picking up Elliott unless you just need him for spot starts or something, because if, God forbid, they actually do give him the starter's net, it's not going to go well. It has never gone well when Elliott's been the one to be relied on for full-time starter role stuff.
Yep. And then one thing to note on Brian Elliott is, so when we've looked at like expected save percentages and normal save percentages, right? So when you look at all strengths, including the PK and the power play and all that, Brian Elliott currently is sporting a 9.262 save percentage. His expected save percentage is 8.917. 8.917. On the flip side, Carter Hart has an expected save percentage of almost the same thing, 8.928, but has a save percentage of 8.618. So they're literally polar opposites in terms of how they're performing. Hart wildly underperforming what he should be doing, whereas you have Brian Elliott wildly outperforming what he should be doing. So there's at some point this is all going to come to a middle ground somewhere, and they're both going to suck, I think. I mean, look, if they both have expected save percentages of 8.9, that's bad. That is hard. That means the workload is very, very hard on a goaltender. And really, when you look at the two, the big difference is that high danger save percentage. How are they performing? Carter Hart has the worst high danger save percentage in the entire league at the moment of like 50%. It is bad. That's a 5-on-5. Whereas Brian Elliott has a very startling high danger save percentage. So at some point it will all... Starling. Sterling is a football player on Man City.
Sterling is the word you're looking for. It's not Starling.
Oh.
Grammar school.
Regina. I learned that one too. It's not Regina, it's Regina. Hello. So Jonathan Drouin is my next one here for Unsustainably High. He's been picked up a lot. And honestly, I do like him as a streamer option. He's not a terrible option to have. I like him quite a bit, but I want to dissuade people from thinking that this here is necessarily a long-term option. So over the season so far, he's played 11 games, and his shooting percentage is at 18%, almost 19% if you round up. But over the last 2 games, that's the last 7 days, he's had a 25% shooting. So it's still super high, and it's wildly, wildly unsustainable. On the season, his IPP is 91% versus 68% last season. The on-ice shooting percentage is actually fine. It's just he's involved in way too many goals at the moment, and that's going to come down. Now, his minutes are also pretty low. Average on the season is 16 minutes, but his last 2 games, he did average 20 minutes. So the ice time is going up a little bit, but just gotta note that shooting percentage is just wildly, wildly unsustainable. So right now, what I see with a Jonathan Drouin is that he should just be getting less points all around. He's good for points, just not as many as he's getting at the moment, because Montreal, from an advanced stats perspective, is actually a good team. But the fact that he's involved in so many points, and on top of that has a high shooting percentage, means that both his assists and his goals should come down a little bit. So he's definitely unsustainably high for me.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, although I do like him a lot more than the guy I'm about to mention right here, who has been added quite a bit, and that's Alex Goligoski.
Yeah, that makes no sense.
Yeah, he was like, he was fantasy relevant like years ago. I forgot he was still in the league for a while there. But here we go in Arizona, playing not a lot of power play time and still managing to get a ton of points on the power play. Arizona's been really strange lately, as I'm sure is kind of noticed at this point, considering we talked about Schmaltz and we've talked about how Kessel's underperforming, got Schmaltz overperforming. We've got Goligoski now showing up. There's a lot, and then you could talk about Connor Garland too, but he's not quite there yet. People haven't really been picking him up, but I mean, if he keeps doing what he's doing, he's going to show up on here next week. So we've got Goligoski. All of his numbers are so insanely inflated. Almost everything is like near triple digits in percentages of increased from last season, from percentages points. So the big thing to notice about what's going on with Goligoski is his on-ice shooting percentage is really high. It's at 14%. That shouldn't be anywhere near that high. Over the last week, it's at 17%. Shouldn't be anywhere near that high. And the thing that's really sticking out to me the most is the amount of power play points he's gotten. Those 4 power play points in his very short amount of time on the power play, because he's only playing about a quarter of the team's time on the power play. So he doesn't get a lot of opportunities, but he's been cashing like crazy. That is going to slow down. He's got 3 of his power play assists that he does have are all secondary. And he's got the 1 power play goal. So there's a lot of things pointing towards regression for him. Everything is pointing towards regression for him. Everything looks bizarre right now. All secondary assists, so even the points that he are getting don't seem very sustainable unless he starts getting more primary assists to back them up. Obviously, as I mentioned, the power play time on ice is not enough to sustain what's going on with his power play points, and his on-ice shooting is entirely too high. Yeah, you might be able to enjoy him for a little bit, I guess, but I wouldn't. I feel like he's very similar to Schmaltz to me right now. He doesn't have anything to back up what's happening, and yet I can't sit here and tell you he's not going to get another assist in his next game. But I personally wouldn't touch him, and I think sooner or later we're going to see him fall off a cliff.
Similar to that is Brayden Schenn, who last year I feel like was such a roller coaster of a fantasy season for him, where one second he was crazy valuable, the next second he wasn't anymore, and what he's doing right now is just ridiculous. He's on an 89-point pace. Last year, he was on a 62-point pace. He has 9 goals. Yes, 9 goals. His expected goals for is 2.78, so around 3 goals. His shot pace is not higher than last year. It's actually lower than last year. He's shooting at a ridiculous 37.5%. Yep, 37.5. And in the last week, so his last 3 games, he shot at 100%. Yep, only got 3 shots on goal.
He got really good.
100%.
He's just the best now.
Yeah, so he's just the best. And even funnier than that, that's all in the power play. His power play shooting percentage at the moment is at 50% on the season, 3 power play goals on 6 shots on goal. All that with just ridiculous numbers. And not to mention, things haven't even gone up. His time on ice is down. His time on ice on the power play has only gone up 15%, which isn't very much, to be honest, when you look at it in the grand scheme of things. His on-ice shooting percentage is 15%. Last year was 10. So that's a huge increase there, 50% around. So Brayden Schenn in general is all around just completely wildly unsustainable and has to come down. Now, do I still like him as a long-term option? Probably. Yep. I especially now with Tarasenko out, I actually like him quite a bit. But you've got to readjust what your expectations are with Brayden Schenn, because what you're seeing right now is just not what you should expect with Brayden Schenn.
I do wonder what the absence of Tarasenko is going to do for him. It's one of those situations where it could go the Pavelski route, where suddenly everybody sucks, but it could also increase the need to lean on these guys like Schenn and Perron and Schwartz and all the other like better Blues players. But we'll see how that all pans out. I don't know that I think it'll be better for him, but we'll see. My next one is Devon Toews. Oh, Devon. It's Devon. By the way,
it is Devon.
It's Devon Toews. 13%. He's Will Butcher. I just realized it. I was looking at his numbers. I was like, oh my God. I know who Devon Toews is. He's Will Butcher. Except he just gets
you sang his praises for so long too.
I know. I like him because I like him as a real player. I don't think he's going to be fantasy relevant because he doesn't shoot enough, which is the same reason that I didn't like Will Butcher. There's no peripherals there. And for a defenseman, if you're not getting me peripherals, I don't want you on my team, almost certainly, because I don't want to rely solely on points that I don't think are going to keep coming if you're not a shooter to begin with. And that's what we've got with Tays here. He's got 8 points in 11 games, which is crazy and good for him. But none of it adds up. He's already got 2 goals on 14 shots, which clearly doesn't add up for a defender. His IPP is 150% in the last week, which I guess means that he moved off the ice and there was a secondary assist that scored. All of his assists are also secondary. I like Tays. I like him as a real life player, but his fantasy relevance is going to be limited. The best thing he's got going for him is being featured on the top power play, but it doesn't make a ton of sense for the Islanders to keep it that way. I know they like their zone entry guys. Devon Tays is supposed to be the new Leddy, and that's what they did with Leddy. But I don't know that I buy that it'll be like that for the rest of the season. So, and even if it is, he just doesn't shoot enough to back up the fact that you're going to go large stretches with getting no points and nothing else from him at some point in the season.
Okay, moving into Unsustainably Low. My first one here is going to be Tyler Seguin. People are truly freaking out about him. Like, I didn't expect this, but people are throwing out trade offers to us that are just insulting to Tyler Seguin's entire being.
Yeah, I like Seguin a lot. I'm actually hoping people start trying to trade him to me.
I know. I've thought about starting to target him. It's pretty insane. His shooting is down a little bit. Granted, yes, shooting is down just a tad. But there's a few things to note. One thing is that Dallas in general isn't shooting as much. So part of the reason that he's not shooting as much is just that Dallas as a whole isn't playing that well. His time on ice is not really down. It's about the same as last year. His point space is way down. His point base right now is 38 versus his 80 last year. But there's a few things here that are leading to that. So one is, of course, like I said, the shot pace, right? And his shooting percentage is currently 5.26%. Whereas last year, it was around 10%. So that should come up significantly. So that shooting percentage is one place. And already we're seeing his expected goals are at 4 at the moment, and he only has 2. So he's already underperforming that, which I would expect him to come up. Last year, he actually hit the nail literally on the head for how many goals he should have versus his expected goals for. So I would expect pretty much the same out of him again this time around. Now, if we take a look at his IPP is actually exactly the same as last year, pretty much. What's really different is the on-ice shooting percentage. Last year, they had a 10% on-ice shooting percentage while Seguin was on the ice. Currently, he's sitting at only 6%. And so if you bring that on-ice shooting percentage back up to normal numbers, which it 100% will come up to, then you're looking at him getting that same like 75% IPP of those added goals, and then you're finding a bunch of points. So I wouldn't be worried about Tyler Seguin. His ice time, his power play time on ice is still the same. His percentage on the power play is still the same. He hasn't scored yet on the power play, and he shot 12 times. Last year, he had an 11% shooting on the power play. So everything to me with Tyler Seguin points to, look, he's on a struggling team. He himself is struggling at the moment, but this is all going to bounce back and come back to normal. Unlike another player I'll talk about later, Tyler Seguin's pedigree does speak for what's to come. And there's no aging factors. There's nothing like that. So I would fully expect Tyler Seguin to kind of regain his form.
Yeah, I agree with that. Like I said, I think a lot of Dallas, well, maybe not a lot, but at least a few Dallas players are pretty good buy low candidates right now, including Seguin for sure. All right, my first one, and I think we may disagree on this. I think I may have seen him on your sheet, but we'll see, is Shea Theodore. Unsustainably, was he on your sheet?
I'm gonna refrain from commenting until it's appropriate.
Okay, because if you're gonna argue with me, then you don't have to bother because you're wrong already. But so the things I like about Shea Theodore, and he was one of my bigger targets coming into the season. I called him for a 50-point pace, which he's a little under right now, maybe a little bit. Yeah, he's a little under. He's got 5 points in 13, but a lot of the numbers look pretty promising. He's shooting basically the same as last season. But his shooting percentage is like non-existent. It's like 3% right now. Again, it hasn't been a ton of games, but he's shooting at a normal pace. He's going to get some more goals sooner or later. And the things that I really, really like about him is his ice time is up from last season. His power play ice time is up a lot from last season. He plays about 2/3 of the power play, and that was what I expected to happen. That's why I targeted Theodore to begin with. My first thought was they have Mark Stone now. So they're not going to do this 1A, 1B stuff anymore in Vegas. They also got rid of Colin Miller and Brad Hunt, who they were using as their quarterbacks. So they really have one good quarterback, which is Shea Theodore. You could argue Nate Schmidt, but I'm not listening, basically. and plus he's been hurt, so he hasn't even gotten an opportunity. But all these things combined with the fact he gets offensive zone starts primarily. His on-ice shooting percentage is about in line. Actually, no, his on-ice shooting percentage is lower than I would expect.
It's in line with last year, though.
Yeah, but I think it was low last year, too. So it should be a little bit higher than 7% considering he's playing with the better players now, especially on the power play. His IPP is also super low at only 35%. I would expect that to be more like 50. And yeah, those are the biggest things that don't add up to me are the fact that he has tons of power play time. He's got a really low IPP, and his on-ice shooting is not as high as I'd expect it to be. And combine that with his shooting percentage being lower than it should be. All these things suggest that he should be getting more points than he has right now. So despite the fact he's only got 5 and 13, I still feel like he should be pacing for about 50, maybe a little bit north of that, actually, considering the way he's playing. He's not shy about shooting, including on the power play. Nothing here. If you didn't show me how many points he had, I would guess that my earlier predictions of 50-ish, maybe a little bit more, were pretty much in line. If all I was seeing were his shot production and his deployment. It all looks good to me. So I'm not really worried about it going forward.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to say I disagree now, but I'll give my reasonings later.
Is this
I'll
like
save it for the proper.
how I've given you your friggin' pickups in the last couple of weeks lately with Armia and Zaitsev just coming out of left field? Next thing you know, they're on your roster.
That's not. We don't talk about that on the podcast. we do not talk about my snake tactics to make sure you don't get the players that you talk about. That is confidential. That only happens behind closed doors. Okay, my next one here is going to be from Winnipeg, Blake Wheeler, who also I'm seeing a lot of frustration with, someone that I still think is a top tier candidate here and someone that is a first round pick in value. Now, there's a few things that I see with Blake Wheeler. One, there's been a little bit of a revolving door with his line mates. You don't know. It was Line A for a bit, and then it was, now I think it's Connor. You never know if it's going to be Ehlers again. Like it just kind of feels like a revolving door thing there. His ice time is still the same as last year, around 20 minutes. The last 2 games, actually, he's averaged 22 minutes, so his ice time has gone up there. I think he's a leader on the team. They clearly look at him for what to do. He's actually shooting more than last year. He's way more than last year. This last week, he was shooting insane numbers, a 369 pace, which is ridiculous. His hit numbers are up, his block numbers are up, his offensive zone starts are up, like all the things that you'd like to see. His average power play time on ice, this is crazy for someone like Wheeler who played so much on the power play. His actual time on ice on the power play has gone up about 21%. This last week, these last 2 games, he averaged about 7 minutes of average power play time on ice, which is insanity. So look, there's a lot of good here, right? And then when you look at the bad is his IPP. His IPP is 40% at the moment versus a 74% last year, and that's down about 45%. His on-ice shooting percentage is actually sustainable at around 10%. He's usually more of like an 11 or 12% on-ice shooting percentage guy, but the fact that his IPP is so low, it's pretty ridiculous, especially when you consider that he's a assist guy first normally. So the fact that he's normally an assist guy first and has that low of an IPP at the moment all points to me that this is all going to come back to form, and I'm not worried at all. And this last week, for example, he was at a 0% IPP. He's gone, I think it's pointless in the last 7 games or 6 games, something like that, ever since Brandon traded to me, actually, if we're going to talk about snake tactics here. So with Blake Wheeler, to me, it's like you have this guy who is getting you better peripherals than he's ever had. Almost, it was one of his best peripheral years so far from a pace perspective. His shooting percentage is in line, so he's getting you the goals that you'd expect. The one place where you're not getting what you'd want out of Wheeler is the assists. And so that's the thing to pay attention to, but all kind of signs point to those will come. So with Wheeler, I think it's one of those things again where it's like patience. You know what his ceiling is. You're not going to get his ceiling in a trade or from anybody else because for whatever reason, to me, Blake Wheeler always has first round upside, but in trades, I only ever see him go for like 3rd, 4th round value in trades. People value him as like this 3rd, 4th rounder, yet gets drafted in the first because he is a first round value. So it's weird. And especially now, if you're in a peripherals league, with all the peripherals he's getting you, he's especially worth that. So yeah, patience with Blake Wheeler.
So and I'll talk about a player.
Don't let the wheels fall off the bus with Wheeler.
I'll talk about a player that has also been pointless for a handful of games here in Dustin Brown. I think, is this the one we disagree on?
No, Shea Theodore.
Oh, he was Shea Theodore. Okay. Well, you're wrong. And if had you disagreed with me about this, you'd also be wrong.
I mean, I have 11 shares of Dustin Brown. I think I'm going to agree with you on this and hope for the best.
Yeah. So the thing with Dustin Brown is I get that he's aging, but his play doesn't reflect that. Typically, when a player like the power forward type, like Dustin Brown, when the age regression starts hitting, you see it in peripherals pretty quickly. A good example would be Jamie Benn. Shot pace stuff, right? You can see year-over-year changes. Dustin Brown's shot pace is up. And it's even up more than his current season-long pace over the last week. So he's shooting the puck. He's hitting a lot. He's playing his normal game. He doesn't look any different than he did last year. In fact, he looks, if anything, a little bit better from a stats perspective, except for the points, of course. The big outliers here are his lack of actually getting the puck in the net to an extent, although it's not that bad, honestly. And his IPP is too low. He's usually about a 60 to 70% guy, which means, again, if you don't know what IPP is, it means the amount of times that the puck goes in the net when he is on the ice, how many of those goals is he a part of? And typically from any solid forward, you'll see it around 70%, maybe a little less. Elite will be a little bit above, and normal will be a little bit less than that. He should be a little bit less than that. He's a lot less than that right now at around 46%, which is super, super low. And then you can combine that with the fact that his on-ice shooting percentage is also a little bit lower than usual, which means there's not a lot of goals going in that should be going in. And even when they do go in, somehow he's managing to not be part of the goal. I don't see either of those things keeping up. He's still being featured on the power play as much as he was last season. His ice time looks fine. I'm not concerned, honestly. I get that he's still, like at the best of times, you're talking about a 65-point guy out of Dustin Brown, so he's not like some stud or anything, but I don't think he's dropped to like complete garbage, especially in banger leagues.
I agree with that. And my 11 shares of Dustin Brown, thank you for putting him on Unsustainably Low and not Sustainably Low. Although in a points league, I did drop him, actually. I think that in a points league, I don't know if he holds as much value as a streamer for right now. I think he's one of those guys you can grab when he's hot. And
depends on the point breakdown,
fine.
As always, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing is that he's right wing only, which makes it tough.
Yep.
But I agree with you. I think he's unsustainably low. I'll definitely be keeping an eye on him and pick him back up once he gets hot and kind of figures it out, which I think he will. My next one here, I'm going to end with a star. Again, this guy has been asked. We have been asked about this guy incessantly. People really want to know what's up, and that is John Klingberg. A lot of people are doing silly stuff with him, and I get it. I get it's frustrating. Although at the same time, I think that when you drafted John Klingberg, you had to know what you were getting yourself into. Not just from a team perspective, but more so exactly kind of who he is. Like, you know he's a guy who's going to get you just points, and that's about it. So that means that when he has a points drought, you really, really feel that drought, right? And right now with Klingberg, he's suffering from very similar effects to Tyler Seguin. He's shooting a tad more, about 3% more, so not a lot, but something. His on-ice shooting percentage is actually about 45% down, so it's a 4.8 right now. It was at 8.8 last year, so just about almost 50% down, which is a big deal. And his IPP is also down. So it's similar to Seguin, where people around him, it's the team in general that's not scoring. So right off the bat, there's not as many points to get in on. And then on top of that, when there actually are points while he's on the ice, he's not being involved in as many as he should be. So his power play time on ice is fine. Offensive zone starts are fine. Hit space is actually a little bit up. So John Klingberg to me is one of those guys that, look, you knew what you were getting into by drafting him. You knew that he was a point-only defenseman, right? If to you 50 points, 55 points is good for a defenseman, then hold on to him and don't do anything rash. I think he'll get there. Now, if that's not valuable to you, then yes, I'd advocate moving off of him, and then potentially for you, this unsustainably low part doesn't matter. But if you're going into this and drafted him with the idea that I'm getting a 55, maybe a 60-point defenseman, and that's fine because he's not going to give me anything else except a few shots, then you're fine, and I wouldn't worry. But if you were expecting more, then yes, I'm sorry to break it to you, but that's just not who he is. And right now, he's all the indicators show me that, you know what, he will get back to where he is, but he's going to get back to who he is, not get back to this ceiling that everyone, for whatever reason, I think likes to think John Klingberg is.
Yeah, I think 60 pace is pretty fair, and then hopefully the power play points will show back up.
I mean, he was a 58-point pace last year.
Yeah.
So, you know, he first needs to get back to what he was doing last year.
Yeah.
And then we can start to talk about 60-point pace and above.
All right. So my last one is Nicholas Backstrom. Now, he recently has been a little bit struggling. He does have 9 points in 13 games, so he's not like the biggest concern candidate, but he actually should be doing pretty significantly better than this so far. All of his stats are showing that he should be doing more than he is. He's only at 50% IPP. His on-ice shooting is in line with the norm. His power play percentage is in line with the norm. So his big thing is just similar to Dustin Brown and basically to a lot of people that show up on this. They're managing to avoid being part of the goal somehow. And considering the deployment that Backstrom is seeing this season, I think he should be doing better than he was last season. Last season, he got 74 points in 80 games. The fact that he's playing with Ovechkin at even strength and, of course, on the power play suggests to me that he should be able to beat that. I don't think anybody's overly concerned with Backstrom at this point, but if this little bit of a drought that the fact that Washington's been scoring without him lately, just view it as a minor annoyance. It's not any indicator of something bigger going on.
Okay, moving into Sustainably High. So the guys that can keep doing what they're doing. I'm going to start here first with the guy that we talked about on Hot Hands. If you didn't catch that episode, go take a listen to that for a little bit more of a detailed insight. But to me, JT Miller, who's my first one here, is pretty much Elias Lindholm from last year. That's my take. That's who I think he is.
Yeah, I've got him too. He's my first one also.
I don't know if I'd say he's an 80-point player like Lindholm was, like a 78-point player. I don't know if that's his ceiling, simply because I don't know if Vancouver is as good, or and he doesn't get as much ice time as Lindholm did that first year with Vancouver, or that first year with Calgary. What am I saying? But everything looks really good for JT Miller. Way more ice time, way more shots. IPP is actually right in line. On-ice shooting percentage is a little bit high, but he's always been a high on-ice shooting percentage kind of guy. His own shooting percentage is also high, and that should come down quite a bit, but not by too much. I mean, I could realistically see JT Miller shooting 14-15% this year. It wouldn't be ridiculously abnormal for his career. His power play shooting percentage is fine. He's getting way more. He's almost doubled his power play time on ice from last year when he was on Tampa. So everything for me with JT Miller looks right in line and absolutely beautiful. And so to me, when you're looking at him, I don't see him as a sell high candidate or anything. I totally just advocate to hold, because you've potentially got an Elias Lindholm on your hands.
Yeah, I agree. Although, I mean, like I said, he's sustainably high for me too, but I have seen people targeting him in trades. The reason I was a little like, I didn't target Lindholm either in trades last season, and I didn't draft him this season, despite the fact that I think he could, have a good season again. I like the idea of getting Miller for free, which a lot of us have, or drafted him late or whatever, but be careful about how you value him, because he's one of these players that is tied to his line, and the line is not tied to him. And that was my concern. That's why I didn't touch Lindholm last season. Obviously, that didn't work out for me, did it? But the idea with Calgary was that they were going to bounce around that top right wing spot between Neal, who turns out maybe it would have worked, and Lindholm. But Lindholm just took off and ran with it, so why change? That seems to be happening with Miller again. But if there is a drought there, I wouldn't be surprised to see them shift around that left wing spot first. I think Pettersson and Besser are a combo. I'm not sure it's a trio yet. So if you're going to trade for Miller, I wouldn't. So I'll give an example. We got an email, somebody asking whether or not to trade Patches for JT Miller, which is a perfectly reasonable sounding trade. But to me, the way I'm viewing, well, first of all, they're slightly different players. I think the point ceiling for Miller is higher than the point ceiling for Patches, but Patches is like a complete player. He'll almost certainly get more shots than Miller. He's going to get more hits than Miller. And I think he's more tied to Stone than Then we've got Miller tied to his line. And actually, maybe not. They shifted him around. But the thing is, there's no bad line in Vegas. He's going to be a top 6 player. If he plays with William Karlsson and Riley Smith, or if he plays with Paul Stastny and Mark Stone, it's fine either way. If Miller moves off the Besser-Pettersson line, Horvat's a fine center, but there's no wing to go with him there. It's just strictly a downgrade. And that's where I think the difference is. I think Patch's floor is much higher than JT Miller's floor, and that's the concern. So, like I'm saying, Miller's great as somebody you can get for free or cheap because his floor is low, but his ceiling is super high. So the variance is fine because he's a player you're not really risking much for. But if you're trading a high floor guy to grab him, especially in Patch's a high floor with decent ceiling guy, you just have to make sure that you have sort of your team is good enough to withstand something happening to Miller.
Yep. Yeah, I think for Miller too, to help people kind of adjust their expectations for him, I would see Miller as like a 65 to 75 point guy this season if he can keep that line. Whereas I see Pacioretty on the season more of like a, I don't know, 60 to 65 guy. Right. But like you said, that floor is there. He got 50 last year, which is the same as Miller, to be honest. Miller got 51. Pacioretty got 50, but still, the whole thing there is the floor is better across the board for Pacioretty than JT Miller, but I like Miller way more for the upside. The other thing, of course, always to note with guys like JT Miller is that if you are trying to trade for them, you're going to be paying sell high price, right? Like you are going to be paying a lot.
Patch has also played about 10 less games, so.
Yeah. So, for example, I would not do. I saw this on a YouTube comment today, actually. Someone asked if they should drop or trade. I don't remember which one. Dylan Larkin for JT Miller. No. Do not do that. That's not the kind of stuff you want to do.
Right.
If you can get JT Miller, like honestly, I wouldn't be totally against a Patches for JT Miller trade if you're set in peripherals, for example, and what you need is points. Then sure, but don't do like a Dylan Larkin or one of these super, super high ceiling guys, like a 90-point ceiling guy for JT Miller. Just not worth it.
Right. All right. Well, my first one was JT Miller, but we've been there. So my next one here is Jaden Schwartz. And I think you probably could have taken a couple other players on the Blues. Actually, maybe not. I feel like every player on the Blues belongs somewhere in here. You could easily have put Ryan O'Reilly in Unsustainably Low. So that's what we think. That's what I think about Ryan O'Reilly. He's, ignoring his last game. But, and then Shen, of course, we had Unsustainably High. And then we've got Jaden Schwartz here in Sustainably High. I think the thing with Schwartz is he just didn't quite have it last season for no real reason. His on-ice shooting it's actually way too high right now over the last week, but on the season, it's all right. His on-ice shooting was lower than I would have expected last season. And his IPP is finally coming up to around where I'd expect it to be. He's actually not even gotten as many goals as you'd expect he's expected for 2.5 and he's only got the 1. It was good to see him come off of the playoffs, playing strong and then come into the season and start strong. He just hasn't been very good at even strength for whatever reason. And the real reason I have him here at Sustainably High, more than what's going on with his production, which you could actually argue is slightly unsustainably high, is that with Tarasenko out, they really don't have a choice but to rely on their Shens, their Ryan O'Reillys, and their Schwartzes over there. So I assume we're going to see an increase in ice time for him, even though he's not a right wing. Just because it's one more power player that they don't have. And so I expect we'll see a climb in every other strong player on the Blues, even if it's just a little bit. And that's where I think you're going to see the difference. I don't like that he's shooting less than last season, but I do think that will start to turn around, especially now that, as I just said, I expect he's going to be leaned on more. He's only 34% owned. So he's somebody you can take a swing at. And if it doesn't pan out, who cares? But I think the upside is there. And I think the upside actually might be higher with Tarasenko out.
For my next one, I'm going to go to a goaltender here in Robin Lehner. He's been fantastic. He's continued his form from last year. He's currently sporting a 9.345 save percentage. His expected save percentage is 9.184, so a difference of almost 1.61% is the difference. It's not terribly massive of a difference. It's something, but I mean, really what you're looking at with Robin Lehner is that, okay, fine, make up that difference, and he's still a good goaltender. And then you have Corey Crawford on the other side, who has an 8.82 with the same expected save percentage. So Corey Crawford is wildly underperformed, whereas Robin Lehner has not really wildly overperformed, but he's overperformed a little bit. But enough that I think that very soon here, we're going to see Robin Lehner steal the net. I think he's 100% going to steal it, and I think he's a good goal. I think it's like safe to say at this point that he is a good goaltender. Now, granted, I did this with Bob. We've been here. I don't want to jinx him, but I think he's really solid, and I think that he's a safe pickup right now, especially if you need a goaltender. Robin Lehner is definitely someone I'd be eyeing that for whatever reason hasn't gotten much love, and a lot of people were scared of the 1A, 1B, whereas instead they were picking up Talbot. People were drafting Talbot but were scared of Robin Lehner. It made zero sense. And so I think that with Robin Lehner, he makes a really, really good second or third goalie option right now.
Yeah, I agree. I've got him in a couple of leagues.
Except for the wins. The wins won't come, but the save percentage and the goals against average will be solid.
Right. All right, my last one here, as you took Miller from me, is Evander Kane. I'm so happy he's on this list.
Oh, but I thought we overrated him.
Yeah, well, how can you not? He's such a wonderful man. But there are the numbers. Okay, I'm not saying that his point pace is necessarily sustainable. I don't think he's going to be above a point per game guy. He is shooting a little high. His on ice is a little high. His IPP is a little high. So everything's a little high. But what I'd love to see is that he is what's happening with him is exactly what I wanted to have happen for Evander Kane in San Jose. And that is he is featured on the top power play and he is making it work. He does a lot on that top power play. So he's already got 7 power play points. That's probably too high. But the fact of the matter is he's getting the goals on the power play. And that's something that San Jose really needed out of him. As soon as they said they were going to put him on that top power play at the beginning of the season, I was like, ooh, I'm so happy that I targeted him as high as I did. Now, he comes with the elite peripherals you'd always expect from Evander Kane. That has not changed. His hits pace is as high as usual, about 173, down from 189. Like, what's the difference, really? His PIMs, I think his PIMs were over-indexed to begin with. I think he was over-projected for PIMs because he had a few games where he got tossed, which is going to happen. It will happen. But I'm not sure you could have reasonably expected 150 PIMs or whatever he was being projected for. But everything else is great. He's shooting like a madman. He's hitting a lot. He's still getting penalties. He's great. I love him.
I love Evander Kane so much. Okay, my next one here is going to be James Van Riemsdyk. We had said before that he just couldn't sniff points. He couldn't find points anywhere. It was impossible for him. But now he's really found his groove. And although this last week, these last 3 games are pretty wildly unsustainable, a 164-point pace, on the season, he's actually fine. And a lot of the things throughout the season were pointing to him being very good and actually playing really well. He's only at a 7% shooting on the season. His shots are way up. He's currently shooting at a 353-point pace. Yes, 353.
That's decent.
Last year, he only shot at 200.
Good Lord.
Which is insane. Yeah. So it's almost doubled. He is killing it right now from a shooting perspective. His power play time on ice is up. His on-ice shooting percentage is down. His IPP is actually exactly the same as last year, but that's simply because also he hasn't really been involved in that many points while he's on the ice in general over the season, but still good that it's the same as last year, very consistent. So all around, he should have a higher shooting percentage, and he's shooting like a madman, and his on-ice shooting percentage is low, and his IPP is the same. If all that sticks, you're seeing a potential 70-point season at James Van Riemsdyk. Maybe. I'm not saying that happens because a lot of it does have to do with deployment, and I think it's pretty insane that he's getting as many shots on goal as he is with the time on ice he's getting, which is no different than last year. So hold your horses a little bit on James Van Riemsdyk, but he's certainly someone that I put on a watch list and say he could be super, super interesting here in the next few weeks.
All right, let's move into Sustainably Low.
This is where I'm going to anger people.
My first one is PK Subban.
Wow. It's happened.
Yeah. There's a very good reason he's not on top power play.
Wow. You don't think he'll get it back?
Yeah. I mean, maybe. But I don't want to predict that far out. And again, he's not a drop candidate. I would probably be shopping him depending on who's high on him. I don't like that they are even toying with the idea of taking him off top power play. And I like even less that it's been working. It's been working with him off top power play. That's bad. That's bad. So that's the big concern I've got going on with Subban. I would be trying to move him, honestly. I've got him in one league. I tried to move him early in the season because I saw kind of the writing on the wall when they started toying around with him. he played in the last week. He played 24% of the team's power play time. He's only 46 on the season. It's not looking good. It just isn't. It just isn't. It's bad. Yes, I do think eventually he'll probably get top power play back, but who knows how long that'll be, and who knows how often this is going to happen. I mean, Vatanen's not the best quarterback in the world, but it seems to be working at the moment. They've got a few other guys in the system that it could work with, right? They've got Will Butcher, of course, who they could take swings at. They've got Damon Severson. They've got other players that could cause problems for Subban's top power play deployment, and that is the biggest concern for me. Subban's not the biggest peripheral guy to begin with, so he's not like John Klingberg in that he'll give you nothing else, but he's not going to give you a ton beyond points. And if he's not getting points, and I don't see how he's going to get more points than he's currently pacing at, which is roughly 36 points or whatever, if he's not going to get top power play.
Here's my take on PK Subban. What you need to do is right now, PK Subban is trending exactly the same as last year in Nashville. So what you need to do is go look at your average stats from last year and see if PK Subban is worth it. If he was not valuable in your league last year on the Nashville Predators, he is not going to be valuable in your league this year.
I don't know about that.
Almost everything is trending the same.
I get it, but he wasn't valuable for anybody last year. He was pacing below
that's my whole point.
Half a point a game. But I think he can do better if he gets proper deployment, he will do better on Jersey. The problem is he's not.
I don't think that'll happen, though. Yeah, I don't think he'll get better deployment.
The thing is, in Nashville, he should be getting more than 50% power play time in Jersey, which he did not get in Nashville for good reason. But that's where I think the difference is. I think Subban should be better in Jersey just because he's the guy. He should be the guy. Why is he not the guy?
He played 48% of Nashville's power play time.
I know.
He's playing 46%.
I know, but what I'm saying is
Devils.
that was not what I would have expected. I would have expected 60, 70% for Subban, and I still do think that if they give him top power play, that's the numbers we should be expecting from him. They have a clear number one power play over there, or they should, and Subban should, if he's playing well, be on it. And that's the difference. That's why I was more excited about Subban this season than I have been prior, because he was not the guy in Nashville, and that was the problem that Nashville had. They had too many cooks in the kitchen, and he was one of the cooks, and he wasn't the best one. Yossi was.
Well, guess what? It seems like the Devils also have a lot of cooks in the kitchen when it comes to the power play.
But they've got crappy sous chefs.
But that's what I know. But look, they've defied everything we've ever said before. Will Butcher stayed on there for God knows how long. Okay, so here's my take. Go look at it and just be objective about it and look at last year, how he was valuable. For example, in a 14, 16 teamer, he's probably worth holding on to. In an 8-person, in a 10-person, no way. He's probably not worth it. Although it's going to be hard to find somebody that's worth it on the wire from a defenseman perspective. But you should at least shop him around a little bit and see if name value will get you something. But ultimately, I think that what you should assume is that, to me, PK Subban is a 45 max player points. I
think he can go higher than that if he gets proper deployment, but we're not seeing it, so I can't predict that.
Yeah. Right now, yeah. If I'm not predicting that, if I'm assuming that's not happening at the moment, because it's been a while now, he hasn't been moved to top power play. It doesn't seem like that's going to happen. Over the last week, he only played 21% on the power play.
Well, he only played one game.
Sure, but still, if we're assuming all of that is true, what you're looking at is a 40-point player, and the same as last year with slightly lower shots. Probably same amount of power play points because he's not getting much time. Like, look at last year. Was he valuable to you? If he wasn't, then he's drop worthy.
I still think he will be better this year than last year, as long as New Jersey lets him. But it's all a matter if they let him.
Yep, it's all a matter if they let him. So yeah, right now for PK Subban, to me, it all comes down to deployment.
Yep.
If deployment doesn't change, you're looking at the same exact PK Subban of last year. So that's pretty much your other thing, right? Is if you believe that it'll change, or it could be worse. If you believe that he will get top power play again, then okay, tack on a few more points and better than last year. If it doesn't change, then you're looking at PK Subban of last year.
So here's my take. I'll make this quick because we've talked about this enough, I think. But if Subban, let's assume, right? Let's assume a very one or nothing, like all or nothing type scenario here. If starting tomorrow he gets top power play for the rest of the season, I think he does significantly better than last season, and he winds up in like the mid 50s. If he gets, assuming that something decent happens with Jersey and they stop doing whatever it is they're doing, but if he winds up power play 2 rest of the season. I think he does worse than last season, and he winds up a 35-point guy, which is
wow. I could see it.
Yeah. I mean, that's literally what he's trending at right now. And he's had better opportunities so far. So, his unfortunately, his range is much higher than I would have liked it to be. I thought he was going to be a high floor guy, but guess not.
Yep. Okay. Time for me to piss off some people in the next one, or not piss off, maybe just make people really, really sad. It's probably going to make people sad. It's Alex DeBrincat.
Oh boy.
Oh yeah. So I'm putting him on Sustainably Low, but I'm only putting him on Sustainably Low because he's lower than people's expectations of him. And I think I think
that's kind of the so everybody knows that is sort of the idea here. Just because we call somebody Sustainably Low doesn't mean they're instantly droppable. It just means they're below what we assume most people had considered them to be for this season.
Yeah.
And we'll stay that way.
Last year, or in the preseason, I did give some warnings on DeBrincat. I did say I am not as high on DeBrincat as everybody else because there were some warning signs. There were some things that I was not thrilled with. He had a 25% shooting percentage on the power play. He had an 18% shooting on 19% shooting in general. And a lot of people pretty much said, oh, that's just who he is. Maybe he is a 19% shooter. And I contended with, I don't really know. He was a 15.5% the very first year, and then last year jumped up to 19%, and right now he's sitting at 10%. Maybe the truth is somewhere in the middle. I think he's more probably, I think it's safer to assume he's like a 14% shooter. So, okay, he's missed out on a few goals. Sure. Now, the problem is, though, add on those few goals, and you're looking at a 65 point player. Last year he was at 76, and this year I would assume he went so high because people drafted him for that upside of points, for that same points and that upside in points. And I remember a lot of projections had him really, really high. And I know that because when I went through my projections, my own projections, the ones I bought and everything, I had to adjust his shooting percentage down because all of them were assuming he shoots at like a ridiculous 19, 17% again, which I didn't think would happen. On top of that, because just in general, Chicago sucks. And also that's another thing now on top of it. Last year, he benefited from an assist perspective a ton from inflated shooting percentages in guys like Dylan Strome. And so last year, his on-ice shooting percentage was a whopping 12.5%, which is pretty ridiculous considering he didn't play on the top line with Kane and Tays. So that high on-ice shooting percentage is largely because of some guys who, quite frankly, not to be mean to Strome or anything, but he's just not someone who's going to bring up your shooting percentage by that much. And so he benefited from that a ton. And right now he's sitting at a healthy 10% on-ice shooting percentage and a 70% IPP.
Yep, that sounds in line.
And Chicago, as we know, Chicago is not a great team. They are not analytics darlings. They don't get a lot of shots on goal. They don't control shot share at the moment. They're also not a good power play team. And so when you take that all into account, yeah, this should be expected from DeBrincat. This is we are seeing who he is at the moment. And so everyone's freaking out saying, oh my God, what do I do about DeBrincat? And honestly, the answer to that is just, you're seeing what you see is what you get. This last week, he was on a 62-point pace. On the season, he's on a 57-point pace, and that I would attribute to potentially a few more goals that he's missing out on, right? But in large part, to me, what you're seeing in DeBrincat is who he is. And I'm putting him on Sustainably Low because I think that I forget what player it was last year. There's a player just like this last year where everyone expected this ridiculous step forward or the same numbers. And it was like, no, hold on. You need to recalibrate completely what you think of the player. And honestly, one player that's getting a similar treatment to that is Timo Meier. I don't have him on this list, but he's a similar player. So with players like this, in my opinion, the way it works is you got to recalibrate your brain to say, okay, hold on. I was expecting 75 points out of this guy. It's going to be more like 65 points, but can I ship him now for 75 points?
Mm-hmm.
That's how I would approach DeBrincat now, is see if anybody out there still sees him as a 75-point guy. But I personally I don't see where he's getting to 75 points unless he shoots at 20% again, and his line mates start shooting at like 20% again, and the power play needs to get better. The power play is just not good enough. That also helped everybody in Chicago. Everybody. And right now, I just don't see where these points are coming from for DeBrincat, unfortunately, to get back to that 70-point guy from last year.
Y'all still with us? All right, my next two are actually more about deployment than they are about their actual numbers. So the analytics are a little less important, and just you can talk about deployment as a reason of why they're sustainably low. The first one here is Justin Schultz over in Pittsburgh. Really simple. He became interesting because of the Malkin injury, which promoted him to top power play. You couple that with Chucky being out, and that is why we saw him get top power play deployment. He started getting some assists, always fun, picked him up in a few leagues. Great. Now we've got Chucky back. They're going with a 4 forward, 1 defenseman, as expected, top power play, and that means Schultz is out. It is Letang, Galchenyuk, Gensel, Crosby, and Hornquist as the top power play unit, and we've got Schultz down the second unit with who cares because it doesn't matter. So that right there is enough for a reason of why you don't need to hang on to him. He's not a big shot pace guy, really. Not terrible. I mean, he's actually doing pretty decent from a pace perspective this season, but it's not going to keep up with him off of that top power play. His peripherals aren't there. He might have a little bit of value on a points-only league, but I don't think so. Even with this deployment, he only saw 5 points in his first 12 games. I don't really see anything that sticks out to me as a reason to hang on to him any longer. The best thing he had going for him was his extremely high amount of team power play percentage, which is going to fall completely off, and he got a lot of his shots on that power play. So all that shows me, I know he's only 28%, but a lot of those 28% they're still holding on can let go. And actually, you know what? I'll jump into my next one too, just because I already mentioned that he's going to be a deployment guy, and that's Nico Hischier. Yeah, he only played 13 minutes in his comeback. He wasn't doing very well when he was top center, only 2 points on the season in his 7 games played. I think they're going to give Hughes a somewhat long leash. Hischier may take that top center position over, but I mean, realistically, should we expect much more than we saw last season? It seems like there's real problems going on over there. So I don't know that we're going to expect anything more than like a mid-50s point pace from him if he even gets top center back, which he's going to have to fight Hughes for at this point. And you couple that with the fact that he's off top power play as well. It's not a good look. It really isn't. So 29% owned. It seems like people have already gotten the message, but those of you that haven't, he is certainly streamable or stream outable. And if he gets that top center back, maybe we'll take a look in the future. But if you miss him, it's not going to be the biggest deal in the world.
Oh boy. So here's my next one. I knew I made a lot of people angry on Monday when I called Joe Pavelski a drop candidate, and I'm going to double down. I'm going to double down on that and make people more angry and give a case here to why Joe Pavelski is sustainably low and why it doesn't, I don't know why he's getting so much defense. So for one, he's old. He's way older than he used to be. That's how the aging works.
Yeah, it turns out.
He gets older. And, you know, a lot of people have, one of the biggest defenses I see for Joe Pavelski is people come at me and say, well, but he's always been a 60-point scorer, so he's a 60-point scorer. I was like, okay, cool, yeah, I guess, but like people are 60-point scorers until they're not. Looking at you, Jamie Benn, same team, yes, you. And he's been on a decline for a few years now. He was at 78 in 2015-2016, then 68 in 2016-2017, 66, 2017-2018, and then 64 in 2018-2019. The thing that propped him up last year was his shooting percentage. If you bring down his shooting percentage last year, he's a 55-point guy. We're defending a 55-point guy here. Mm-hmm. Now, what's crazy about him is that to me on the Stars, and this is where I think this might get a little bit contentious with people, I think he's like a 50-point guy.
Yeah, he might be.
I think you're looking at, I think Joe Pavelski on the Stars is a 50 to 55-point guy. He is not the main guy anymore that people go to on the power play or at even strength. On top of that, the Stars are not as good. And he's shooting at 11% right now. Last year, he shot at 20%. You know what his average is on his career? It's 12%. He's currently shooting at his career average. So you're seeing the number of goals that you should get from Pavelski, and his shooting is down 45%. So his shooting is
that's the biggest concern,
down.
And kind of leads into what I was saying about Brown. I think Brown is a good comparison here because they're similar aged, but you can see Brown is not falling off the same way. Brown's peripherals are staying there. His use is staying the same. Now, Pavelski coming into the season was a big question mark anyway, because we didn't know how Dallas was going to use him. What we did know is Dallas needed depth. And I mean, Pavelski is a great source of that, or so we thought, at least some source of that. But it hasn't really been working out. And I mean, best case scenario, if the Stars do figure it out, Pavelski might be able to shine a bit on that top power play. But I don't know that we're going to see much beyond that. And even shining for him might not be all that bright this season.
Yeah, and I mean, if you look at last year, there was a huge drop-off in shots last year. In the preseason, when we talked about the Stars, we mentioned that. We said last year there was a big fall-off in shots, just like there has been so far. The only thing that saved him was that shooting percentage. Now, here's the funny thing is, to prove this out, I went and took a look at all the shots for. So how many shots on net has he been involved in? Or how many shots have happened while he's been on the ice? And then let's assume that his on-ice shooting percentage comes back up to his last years of around 10.5%, right? So take those, and 10.5% of those shots he's on the ice for go into the net. Cool. And then he's involved himself. So that's 12 goals so far. That's all. He's only been on the ice for 12 goals. Let's say if the world were perfect. He's involved in 66% of those goals. That gives him about 7 or 8 points. You know what pace that is? 7 points is a 44-point pace. 8 points is a 50-point pace. He is currently playing, if everything were perfect, if it were literally last year's Joe Pavelski outside of shooting percentage, we are literally looking at a 50-point player. So
yeah, it's a bit concerning for sure.
I know it feels preposterous to say, oh my God, this always 60-point guy is now falling off a cliff. That's how it happens. It's how it happens, especially guys like him that rely on his shot. And now you're also seeing his minutes decrease. I'm sorry, folks. And I hope I'm wrong about this, because I like watching Joe play. But like right now, everything to me points to he's just not fantasy relevant anymore.
No, he still has some relevance. I don't know about not relevant at all. It depends on the league, but yeah.
Dude, how is he? Explain to me how he's relevant, please. 114 shot pace. His hits are down to 57 hit pace, 25 block pace, and you're looking at potentially a 45 to 50 point guy unless things start to go crazily right for him, especially in the deployment category.
Yeah, I mean, the deployment is the biggest thing that can happen for him is an increased deployment, and I don't know that happens without there being some sort of dramatic change in Dallas, which we've talked about. I'm not going to bring that back up, but there's a path to him being relevant. But again, I don't know that people draft him at, I don't know what rounds, single digit rounds, which were too high for Pavelski, especially this season. So I think that's where people are getting burnt the most. They spent high round value on this guy, and now you're seeing kind of the true colors come out. Yeah.
It's funny to me that we see guys like Jonathan Toews get completely crapped on, right? This is where I kind of get to this. Is Jonathan Toews to me is a guy that gets constantly crapped on for being a terrible fantasy player, and like everyone's dropping him now and doesn't want him. And then you look at Joe Pavelski, who's doing significantly worse, way less shots, less point upside, has terrible hits and blocks too, and yet he gets crazy amount of defense from people saying he's fantasy relevant. And he has no numbers to back that up at the moment. No deployment to back that up. I don't even care if he gets second line deployment, because that was, I think, everyone's defense as well when I mentioned him on Monday was, oh, now he's back to the second line. So what? He played 17 minutes over the last 2 games. I don't care if he gets second line. Dallas is just simply not as good, and he's not the guy anymore. And on top of that, they don't really play a straight one, top power or top line. So it doesn't matter really where he's at right now, unless he's on the true top line that's getting a ton of minutes. And even then, even if he's there, where are his shots?
I don't know that he's doing significantly worse than Toews at the moment, but
he's doing significantly worse than Toews.
From what perspective? Because
from an upside perspective.
I mean, that's kind of guessing though. Like their points are obviously not good on either side. The one thing I would say about Toews is he's somehow dodging his IPP even more than Pavelski is. But beyond that, they're both pretty disappointing so far.
Yeah, I mean, the IPP is the part that he's dodging quite a bit. And on top of that, his shooting percentage is ridiculously low. Right now, Jonathan Toews is shooting at 5%. He's a career average of 14%, whereas Joe Pavelski is shooting at exactly his shooting percentage.
Yeah, but you're talking about the difference of 1 goal.
With Jonathan Toews?
Either one, yeah. If Toews gets 1 more goal, then he's the same as Pavelski, points-wise, goal-wise, and assist-wise. And his shooting percentage would be right around the same, too. It would be at 10%.
But I'd rather gamble on Jonathan Toews' shot upside, and I'd also gamble on Jonathan Toews' ability to play with Patrick Kane.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you, but I don't know that I would say significantly. That's the word I was worried about there.
Fine. Significantly, not so much. I think I use significantly just because of how much of a disparity there is by how much people defend Joe Pavelski versus, admonish Jonathan Toews.
What I would say, I would use that. Okay. I'm going to try to be brief about this, but there has been, Toews was very close to making my unsustainably low call here. I actually removed him because we put a bust watch out, and I was like, whatever. Check out Bust Watch on YouTube. But so one thing I noticed about Toews is I think people are worried about what his ceiling is now. And that's, I think, the big difference between Pavelski and Toews. I think Toews' ceiling is way higher. And even if their floors are comparable, their floors are drop worthy, which is unfortunate. But if you decide both of them are going to be at their floors, neither one is worth rostering. If you decide both of them are going to be at their ceiling, I think Toews is way above Pavelski. And if you just kind of hedge your bet there, I still think Toews is above Pavelski. And that's where I think the difference is. And that's hard to just look at stats and kind of call that out, but because of deployment stuff. But I do think that Toews, he's immovable from the top line, it seems like. He's immovable from the top power play, which I don't think goes for Pavelski at all, especially from the lines as we've seen, but from the power play either. And then we see Toews, I think, you'd assume that he'll be playing with Kane the majority of the time. I mean, who knows? But that's what I expect and I hope. And they have reunited them, so we'll see what happens going forward.
And there you go. Hopefully, we didn't anger you too much. We might have broken some hearts, but we'll the city of Dallas. If you want to talk to us, you can reach us at our email. So if the mayor or something is angry and wants to reach us, you can find us somehow. We may ignore you, but you can reach us. Certainly. But we'll be sure to be back on Friday with a weekend preview edition. Also, be sure to let us know in Discord, on Twitter, what you think of some of the candidates that we put out there. And also give us some ideas on who you want to hear on Bust Watch and Hot Hands. And we will catch you on Friday. Thanks for listening.
Yep. Thanks for listening.